Hello and welcome back to the Astro Imaging channel. Tonight's session, an open discussion, but we've had some discussions offline, and we want to try and focus these open discussions. We want to pick a more, not such a broad topic, a more refined topic, and elaborate on that. It'll make it easier for people who are searching for these. Or who are searching for specific little tidbits of astrophotography, and it won't just kind of run all over the place. The intent is, we've noticed that our open discussions, we have great talks. We have a lot of viewers for them. A lot of you guys basically watch every week, but we don't get a lot of follow-up viewers. Why? Because it's basically open discussion. So it's for our weekly people. This way, maybe we'll get some follow-ups and we'll have more of a focused topic. So however you listen to us, however you watch us, if you're not watching us live, you'll have that opportunity. So that said, tonight's session, tips for beginners. I'd like to focus the conversation mostly on things that you've either wished you had known before you started, or pitfalls that you fell into, or things you did wrong, or things that you think a lot of people do wrong. We've had the misconception topic before, and this could lead into that as well, because I like that. There are a lot of misconceptions in astrophotography, and for someone that's never done it before, I think just pointing out a few of those definitely helps. I always joke that people, when they see my photographs, they want to know how I'm doing this, what I'm doing. And I tell them basically what I'm doing. You know, it's not just put your camera up to the telescope, click the picture, and you're done. You're taking long exposures, you're guiding, you're doing this, and like 2 or 3 minutes into it, I lose 1 out of every 10 people. Or excuse me, 9 out of every 10 people. But 1 out of every 10 people is really interested, and they would love to hear more about it. So that said, I already see some things, some topics popping up there, and I'm going to go through a few of them. But before I do that, there was one general thing that we discussed before the session that I think really applies. Don't overthink a lot of this. If you have a camera, see what you can do with that camera that you have. Try as many things as you possibly can with whatever gear you have. You can Google barn door trackers. It's a little tracking mount that you could use with a DSLR that you can actually build yourself with a few I'm not going to say household things, some Lowe's items. But basically, you've got, I'm not going to say a good tracking mount, but you've got a way to do something, a way to like get some of the concept down of what's going on. As you progress, you're going to be spending money on mounts and gear. And of course, that popped up. Probably the most suggested thing by people who know what they're doing in astrophotography is buy a good mount. Mount is the brains behind the entire operation. It points for you, it tracks for you. A good mount will track very smoothly. A poor mount will track very poorly and will give you issues, which is why we always suggest spending a considerable portion of your budget on the mount. But that said, like I said, we were discussing earlier, not overthinking, and I'm going to try and give, I'll try and start off with a few minutes of kind of what I think are the most advantageous things or the most beneficial things for beginners to think about. The first is trying it. Try it with what you have. The second is do your research, and there's 2 ways you could do it because there's 2 different types of learners. There's the hands-on learner that have to get there and go see it. And for those types of people, go to a local astronomy club. I can almost guarantee that there's someone at your local astronomy club that is an astrophotographer that can basically teach you everything you have to know, assuming they're willing. And possibly at your club, they'll have an observatory. You'll get to see cameras hooked up to it. You'll get to see the results. You might get to see some of the processing. So if you're that type of hands-on learner where you really have to go there to see it, it's a great opportunity. It's also a great opportunity to see really good gear, gear that you probably wouldn't normally come across as a beginner. But the second, I guess I'll call this the more introverted method, would be if you're an internet guy and you want to do your internet research, join a forum, and I will suggest Cloudy Nights. Join a forum, ask your questions. If you're ready to really spend, excuse me, your budget, you've got your budget set, you're ready to spend, don't go on there and say, I'm buying this and this and this and this and this and this. Will it work for astrophotography? Say, I'm thinking of this setup for astrophotography. Is there something I should change? Be open to changing. You're going to come across a lot of people who have that set up and know a thing or two about the nuances of it. And that really prevents you from coming across what could be an incompatibility, which happens. There's some gear that just doesn't work together. There's some gear they sell that isn't quite as good as other gear that may be a lot cheaper. Some things sound very simple, but they're actually very complex. So make sure you get personal experiences with whatever it is you're looking at. If you're thinking of a specific system and this is going to sound terrible, go on to Cloudy Nights, see what someone's photographing with that exact system. Most people have their system in their signature. If you price it out and it's within your budget and you like the photographs he's taking, then buy exactly what he has. Ask him for tips. Tell him you're thinking about buying his exact system because you like his photographs. And he's going to say, well, I've been doing this for 20 years and I've learned this and this and this. You're not going to be taking photographs right off the bat, but that's part of the learning process. Right off the bat, I'm going to say keep your expectations limited. You're not keep your expectations low. You're not going to take APOD quality photographs right off the bat. At first, what I would say is try to take images that are better than what you see through the eyepiece. After that, try and make your images better. The big realization that most of us have is the quality of the image depends on how much time we actually have put into the acquisition. We all start off with 1 hour images. If you're doing it from a light polluted sky, you're not really getting that much signal in an hour. A lot of us have gone from those 1 hour images to progress up to 8 hour images to 10 hour images to 20, 40 hour images. The people that are putting out world-class images are taking 20 to 40 hour exposures on each individual target, just because they want the signal to noise ratio to be really strong. They want a strong signal in there. They don't want a lot of background noise. It makes processing it that much easier. So there, I see 10 minutes I've been talking for. So what I'm going to do is I actually have a beginner in the room. Wow, a beginner in the room. I shouldn't call him a beginner, though. He's been doing this, I don't know, Steve, how long? 6 months, 12 months?
I guess I'd say I've been doing it for about 6 months. I've obviously been involved in astronomy for longer. My technical skills, I think, are above average in terms of understanding the techniques and stuff. It's just a matter of time and getting out there. I also live in Chicago. Our weather here is atrocious. Tonight we have fog and clouds, and pretty much the entire winter we're lucky to have one night a week that's clear. And then, of course, I have 2 kids and a job, so those are all things that interfere with that one day a week that the weather's clear.
Yep. So it's funny you mentioned that you consider yourself technical, because I think a lot of us, I don't know if it's the technical nature that we have that draws us to astronomy, or if it's just that, I don't want to call it a sciencey minded brain, but maybe an inquisitive brain, someone who wants to figure stuff out. And the universe is basically the one thing that we all want to figure out, right?
I think when it comes to like astrophotography or anything actually in the field of astronomy, I don't feel like there's anything that can limit me. I have the the persistence to keep trying, and with all of the technical sources out there, YouTube, this channel, other YouTube channels that are kind of focused on astrophotography, I think over time I will become a what I consider to be a good astro imager. I also have local resources, friends who are in the channel, help out or will answer questions whenever I have something to ask them. So
Great.
Yeah, I would comment about that as far as, taking a mentor, I think is a big thing. Instead, like, I would disagree with you a little bit on the forum thing, where just going to a forum and just like reading, because there could be a lot of bad, it's the internet. There could be a lot of bad information on it, but an actual mentor, I think, is a much better way to go.
Yeah, we've had that discussion a lot. Whether you actually can take a mentor who would basically walk you through everything. And I mean, it's basically the ultimate opportunity for anyone. But I think you have to seek them out. It's probably the best reason to go to a local astronomy club, because you are gonna see people that are interested in it and that know what they're doing. Like Tolga said, on the internet, everybody's an expert, right? You can legitimately have a conversation about astrophotography with someone who has no idea about astrophotography, but they know they're smart, so they can figure it out and give you lots of advice on it. And those people do find their ways onto the forums frequently, and try and reinvent the wheel of astrophotography all the time. So yeah, I understand that. Steve, I see you. Do you have a comment on that?
I guess a couple comments. I guess on the Cloudy Night forums, there just seems to be such a wide breadth of topics. I'm wondering which channels are the best, or which like where would I find you guys hanging out or to ask questions?
So I haven't been on Cloudy Nights in a while. I actually logged in for the first time a couple of days ago, in a long time. But for the most part, it seems like the same few guys hang out in the beginner and intermediate astrophotography forum. And it's not so much because we consider ourselves beginners, as I think we like chatting with the beginners. And in the CCD forum, you've got more people who really know what they're doing, more advanced topics. A lot of us will probably learn more in the CCD forum than we would in the beginner forum. But that said, a lot of us are not just there to learn, we're kind of there to share what we know. So the beginner and intermediate imaging forum is the primary place that I would say to check out. It's where I got my start. And it didn't prevent me from making all mistakes, but it did definitely accelerate my learning. So we've got, yeah, buy a good mount. Why do we buy a good mount? We always say we want a mount that's just going to disappear underneath us, which is a really boring thing to say, right? I want a mount that I'm just going to forget about and it's just going to work. But why? Well, because whenever anything goes wrong, it's if you have a poor quality mount, it's almost certainly the mount. You have to buy a good enough mount that you're not going to have troubles. Even worse than that is a lot of the mass-marketed mounts have, I'll just say the quality control isn't great. So you might get a brand new out-of-the-box mount that doesn't work as good as your neighbor's brand new out-of-the-box mount. So a lot of us, after we've been doing this for a little while, will go to the more specialized mount manufacturers at a price, of course, or maybe we won't. Maybe we'll buy that entry-level mount, and we'll use it, and we'll use it, and we'll use it, and we'll tweak it, and we'll hyper-tune it. But I think what ends up happening is you start to realize how much effort's going into it. We all have those stories where we went out and I had a run of sessions where I went out 3 times in a row, and for one reason or another, nothing went right, and I came back with no images, which I think is going to be common in astrophotography. Probably one of the biggest disappointments is you don't always come home with something, and sometimes you'll drive a far distance and it'll cloud up, and you'll turn around. But that's the hobby. That's if it was easy, everyone would do it, and it probably wouldn't be as rewarding.
I have a little theory on that. I think, you know, just like what's said, the technical aspect, I think a lot of people enjoy that. Enjoy figuring things out. That's part of the hobby. I think if it was easy, I don't think we wouldn't be doing this. We'd find something else to do it.
I would agree with that. I think it's a steep learning curve, but I think if you step back and look at this hobby, you have to say this is the kind of challenge that I'm going to be facing for the next 6 months to a year to 2 years, or you know, maybe for the rest of your career or your interest in the hobby. You know, just getting your mount polar aligned, and then learning how to use a guide camera, and then you know, just learn how to use your camera in general, how to getting flats and darks, and getting, you know, just the imaging itself. All that stuff takes a certain amount of time to learn how to do it, and then even longer to perfect it. So it's you know, it's just the nature of our hobby, I guess. Yeah.
Well, it's funny because since he's not here, I can joke about him. But Alex always comments about the gearheads in our hobby, right? The people who are always interested in the new gear, and you know, Alex isn't like that. The guy with a couple AP mounts and 2 observatories, one here and one, he's not a gearhead. But I wonder, is it? I completely agree. We like figuring out technical problems, right? That's part of it. It's in the comments right now. That's part of the fun of this, is figuring out how to get that system working perfectly so that you can take the images. But at the same time, is it that technical aspect that gets us into the hobby? Or maybe if you're not technical enough, if you can't figure these things out, maybe you just can't stay in the hobby. One more time on Alex, he jokes about the people who walk into a store and spend $20,000 to buy a basically pro system, and 2 weeks or a month later, they sell it to Alex because they just can't figure this stuff out, or they don't have the time for any of this stuff. Maybe it is that. Maybe it's a lot of people have the desire, but once you actually get into the nitty-gritty of it, only a few people have either the technical ability or the patience. For me, I have the desire. I mean, the desire drives all. You know, my images, from the first image I took I say the same thing. I was jumping up and down. No, I was literally jumping up and down. I couldn't believe what I saw on my camera. The first time I looked at Jupiter just through the eyepiece, I couldn't believe it. And that drives that desire to basically see it better, see what's out there a little bit better. And you can't get a better view of it with an eyepiece or a bigger telescope. You really need to hook the camera up in. And to me, processing is really what makes it sparkle. We add a little bit of artistic element to it, but basically, in our science, that's the artistic element. We've said before, for people who are very technical, or for people who may not be great with a paintbrush or a pencil, this is the way we kind of display our artistic abilities. So Josh is commenting that one thing he wished he knew as a beginner was that the polar alignment scope in the mount may be off rotation in a new mount. And it took him a couple weeks to figure that out. Yeah. One of the things that I would say about this hobby is almost nothing works out of the box. Almost everything has to be calibrated or dialed in, with a few exceptions. Sometimes when you buy premium gear, or mounts, I'd say, they come dialed in. Optics, anything can happen. It basically depends on how rough your UPS guy is, or how bumpy the ride home is. But yeah, there's little nuances to any piece of gear that you could say, you know, there's some pieces of gear, I'm trying to think of an example, there's some pieces of gear where you almost get the warning in advance. Trying to think of an example. I know Starshoot Auto Guider, the original Starshoot Auto Guider, when someone would buy it, I would say, okay, great guide camera, really cheap, great guide camera, as long as you're using a piggyback guider. But if you're using an off-axis guider, don't. It's that one piece of advice you have to give someone if they're looking at one particular, or any particular piece of gear. So Elmiko's pointing out something about his setup routine, which is another thing as a beginner you might not think about. You are going to probably be driving out to darker skies and taking your mount out of your car and setting it up. You're going to point it roughly north. Then you're going to polar alignment. You're going to do this, I don't know, a few times, 5, 10, 15 times. And all of a sudden, you're going to say, how do I make this more efficient? So the first time you set up, maybe it takes you 2 hours. The second time, maybe an hour and a half. A lot of us now shoot for 15, 20 minutes up and running. Maybe a little bit more depending on your walk from the car. But between polar alignment scopes or Polemaster, there are a number of either gadgets or pieces of hardware that will help speed up your setup. Better cable management, having the PC on top of the mount. There's a bunch of different things you could do. We've had past sessions on them. Just kind of limit that. That's probably one of the other things we all kind of strive for is after we've figured out how to make it work, how do we figure out how to make it work easier? And George says making things work is the fun part. GIMP. I've used GIMP, and I used it for astrophotography processing. At the time, it didn't process 16-bit images. I believe it'll process 16-bit images now. How does it compare to Photoshop and PixInsight? So it is nothing like PixInsight because it's pretty easy to use. It's very, very similar to Photoshop, just the buttons are in different places. it is a little bit more limited. The filters aren't as good, although at this point they probably have a lot of third-party stuff that for astrophotography, if you were to be using it, you would probably be able to get by. Assuming you can process 16-bit images with it. If you're only processing 8-bit images, you're losing a lot of data integrity as you're processing. But I believe I heard that. I think I heard that a few years ago. So if they don't have that figured out by now, then I don't know. But yeah, I use GIMP. Works well. I actually used it before. I started astrophotography. Went from Photoshop to GIMP, back to Photoshop, and no complaints. It's free. So if it's free, you try it out. Chicago weather does suck. One of the other beginner deterrents is weather. Whenever you're trying to talk someone into buying some astrophotography equipment, don't talk about the weather. Don't talk about setup. Don't talk about polar alignment. Just say, look at these beautiful pictures you could take. Yeah, Chris Davis is commenting, likes anything that can connect to a computer, and astrophotography has lots of toys to learn about, and the topic itself is limitless in being able to learn. Mechanical aspect drives Elmico. Some things that the software does for you, like plate solving, just kind of impresses you.
If I can, Adam, if I can, like, talk about my mistakes when I first began, and I think I still make those same mistakes today. Believe it or not, I'm still can't explain why. I would make a decision, and then I would go look for opinions that match that decision instead of listening to the people who really know what they're talking about. That's my biggest mistake, and I'm guilty of that today. Biggest mistake.
Yeah, I've seen that before. I think that is probably something we all do. You see a piece of gear and the description perfectly describes what it is you want to do. It just seems like a perfect fit. And you may ignore that person who said, yeah, I bought that and I used it and it didn't work because this. I look at field derotators as an item like that. You know, if I had a long conversation with someone in the Cloudy Nights forum about field derotators. I may be wrong, but I think 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, they were probably a little bit more common. I don't know if it was mostly professional observatories using them on alt-azimuth mounts, or whether it was people trying to simplify astrophotography so that you could use an alt-az mount for astrophotography. But the argument goes, oh yeah, field derotators work really well. They work so well they use them in professional observatories, and basically for $500–600 you don't have to worry about meridian flips or polar alignment or anything like that. But the truth is, there are a lot more complexities that go into that. There are a lot more limitations, to the point where something that sounds like the perfect solution to a problem really just brings on a whole lot more problems. Whether it's taking flats, or the accuracy of the field derotator, or issues with alignment, or the fact that the field derotator kind of has to know where it is in the sky. There's a lot of things that go into it. And even though it describes the solution to your problem perfectly, it may not accomplish the solution to your problem perfectly. They sell a lot of stuff out there, and I hate to say this in our hobby, where basically everyone's a hobbyist and everybody's trying to develop good products, but they sell a lot of stuff out there, that just really shouldn't be sold. Just doesn't work well enough to do it. Not just in astronomy. There's basically you could walk through the cleaning section of your supermarket, and half the stuff in there isn't necessary at all. But oh well, I guess that's a pet peeve of mine. How many types of soap do you really need? How do you define what's a good mount? So I think that's a hard question. There's no such thing as a good mount, right? I guess what we're looking for is a good enough mount. A mount that's good enough to let you take photographs that you're going to be happy with, images that you're going to be happy with. Basically, Celestron, Orion, they're basically the larger mount manufacturers out there. And if you go through the room, we've all probably used them, and we've all probably taken great images with them. I took images that I think a beginner would be happy with an alt-azimuth mount, with a CPC 800, which is not an imaging setup at all. So I'm going to say I think we're at the point now where even some of those entry-level mounts, the ABX, the CGEM, the new rounds of the CGEMs, the Atlas, and the whole line of Atlases, as long as you're not overloading them, they're all basically sufficient. You are going to have to tinker. You're going to have to play with them a little bit. There may be some times that they need some tweaking. So a good mount is a good enough mount to basically achieve what you want. So what do we mean when we say buy a good mount? That might be a little bit different of a question. I think that in that sense, we're really saying plan on spending a significant portion of your budget on your mount. Your mount is going to determine everything. If you end up buying a bigger scope and putting on a smaller mount, you're in trouble. So you always have to, if you want to future-proof yourself, make sure you buy a good enough mount. I don't believe so, Tolga. Is there a limit on the people in chat? There shouldn't be. So yeah, so when you go to the premium mount manufacturers, what you're actually getting is at a price, whether it's Losmandy, AP, Paramount, which are basically US mounts. Then there's some overseas, which I'm not as familiar with, of course. They're out there. But what you're actually getting is you're getting a mount that wasn't really mass-produced. It was produced in smaller batches with tighter tolerances, almost certainly by people who are using those mounts daily. It's not produced in a factory by factory work. Well, I shouldn't say that. It is produced in a factory by factory workers. But it's produced in a factory by factory workers who happen to be astronomers that use those mounts. So that's why you do much better to spend that budget on a premium mount. This isn't going to be for everybody. It's not going to be a beginner walking in and spending $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $10,000 on a mount. But a year, 2 years into using your Celestron or your Orion, you might know why you want that better mount. That might be your point when you do it. When you get that better mount and you set it up for the first time and you remember how your old mount was tracking and you remember all the little nuances and you realize that this really doesn't have that many nuances. If you can follow the instructions, then it's going to work as it's intended. Well, all of a sudden you got yourself that boring mount that's just going to work. And 1 year, 2 years into astrophotography, you're going to really enjoy that boring mount that just works underneath you. You're going to pay a price for it, but it's money well spent. Chris started because he saw an iridium flare in the desert. And since then, he's spent his retirement on gear, and now he's finally comfortable with getting good data. Yeah, there's always some trigger. Andromeda in West Virginia, that's what it was for me. The hobby does get expensive. It can turn people off. It's why I say use what you have. Don't ever not image because you don't have the right thing. Use what you have, but let's say you have a glitch that's preventing you from getting it to work. Try and figure out a way. Use that technical skill that you have to find a way to make it work. Ooh, someone's flying with this with a C11 Edge with the Celestron bag case for it, and he's terrified. Does anyone have experience with the Celestron case? That's a soft case, isn't it? Or is that the no? There's a. I think JMI does the hard case, right? I think the Celestron case is soft. You know what I would suggest? Put it in the shipping box. Put it in the original box, and maybe bring it that way. You know, it's the way Celestron ships it, so it's got to be the safest way out there. And it should fit. You shouldn't have any issues with it. What was it? The C11? Maybe that might be a little bit big to go in an airlines. I'm not sure. I don't know. You have to talk to your airlines for that one. That's a difficult question. So why is using the Starshoot auto guider camera no good when using an off-axis guider? It's just not sensitive enough. You need a really sensitive guide camera for an off-axis guider, and I've seen it a million times. In fact, I've done it. Buy the off-axis guider and say, well, why won't the Starshoot auto guider? If I find a bright enough star, it should work. No, it doesn't really work that way. You can find a bright star, maybe you can get focus, but you're not trying to find a bright star and get focus on it. You want to find a star that's in the field right in the perfect spot, so you don't have to keep searching for one. You need it to be there. So that's why you really need that sensitive guide camera. You might find a star with the Starshoot auto guider, but you're not going to find a star reliably. And reliability is really what you need. Can anyone recommend reliable USB cables and a hub? Seems like this hobby eats USB cables for lunch. You know what? I've bought expensive USB cables and I've bought cheap USB cables. And the cables that I buy from Monoprice for like 79 cents each, in whatever length I want, whether it's 1 foot long or, I don't know, what is it, up to 15.5 feet long. The cheap ones die just as quickly as the expensive ones. You could even buy the ones that have like the shielded, I shouldn't say shielded, the cable wrap, so it's supposed to slide a little bit easier if you're using through the mount wiring. So I don't really overspend on that. For the hub, I don't know whether you're looking for a DC hub. What is the DC hub that people use? Starlink, something like that. If anybody knows, please suggest it. But that's there's one particular DC hub. StarTech, yes, StarTech, yeah. And that seems to be the most reliable. CCDs can be funky sometimes. Might be better not to run your CCD through the hub. But that seems to be one of the more highly suggested, highly recommended ones. Yeah, field rotator is more hip on fork-mounted SCT, which itself has lost popularity. Lodestar, better than the Starshoot auto guider, of course, at a price, but you'll always find a guide star. Almost always find a guide star. ZWO, ASI, 174, 290. Can they be used on an off-axis guider? I'm not sure. I know they're small pixels, right? You know, I don't want to say yes or no. I'm inclined to say the pixels seem a little bit small. It might not be sensitive enough. That said, the read noise might be low, so it might balance itself out. I'm just not sure. Yeah, the cold is what gets the cables. It's not that the cables themselves die. It's that they get so cold that they turn solid, and then they're bending in the mount or flexing and probably cracking. Interesting. So someone's saying they don't believe that expensive mounts are the be-all and end-all in astrophotography. Flexure's usually the main killer to this hobby. Flexure's the hardest issue to sort out, and some people have issues even with an expensive mount. And I agree with that. Is it the be-all and end-all? No. And people can take an amazing image with a beginner level mount. In fact, I've seen the people that I call naturals that come in with beginner mounts and take great images. But I think what happens is, excuse me, you start doing it a lot, and you go out 10 times, and say 7 of them are successful. But those 3 times, one was this issue, one was that issue, one was that issue. You go out another 10 times, and then you have like 5 bad nights in a row, and you're chasing some issue that you can't really find out. It might be the mount, it might be flexure, it might be this, it might be that. As you get better equipment, it tends to eliminate a few of those things, a few of those potential problems. For me, I had an issue that I was chasing, and I was driving AP nuts, asking them, "Could it be this? Could it be this?" Then I went on to PhD guiding, and I was asking them, "Could it be this? Could it be this?" And basically, if you're buying a good mount, you can rule a lot of it out. And that's what they were saying to me was, "No, we think you can rule out the mount." And I didn't believe them, but in the end, it wasn't the mount. The mount basically works fine. But doesn't matter whether you have a premium or a beginner level mount, you can still have issues.
Yeah, I get a lot of questions like that where it's definitely an optical problem, and people think it's a tracking problem. Mm-hmm. One telltale sale, and this might be a good tip for everybody who's listening. Usually, a good way to tell is that if it's a tracking problem, or the elongation will be uniform across the field, versus if it's an optical problem, most likely it's going to be the elongation, the angle of the elongation is going to change from corner to corner. So if you see that, that is not a tracking problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which reminds me, we're supposed to have one of those a show one of these days on optical problems and how to identify and eliminate them. We'll have to check on that. Sorry, as I read through here. Yeah, a lot of suggestions on how to get that C11 on the plane. One is buy a seat on the plane. One is ship at UPS, which is actually, to me, that actually sounds like a good idea. Las Vegas to Brazil international shipping, that could be really expensive. That said, so could a broken mount. Excuse me, a broken SCT. David Frederick suggesting Tether Pro USB cables. How much better is the CGX compared to the CGEM? I'm not qualified to answer that question because I have not owned either of them. So rather than being that person that doesn't own one but figures he's pretty smart and can give you advice on it, I'm not going to. If anyone has experience with those mounts, please comment. What kind of damage happens to a mount in collision? I'm new to imaging and has had a recent glancing blow of the scope hitting the tripod leg on an Atlas mount. Can it damage the gears? Okay, so can it damage the gears? Yes. But I'll tell you something. They're pretty rugged. You're most likely not going to do much damage to your mount by impacting the tripod. I had my user error, my AP mount. I tightened down the gearboxes on them, and I guess I didn't tighten them down tight enough, or maybe summer to winter, the metal expanded a little bit, and the gearboxes worked their way loose a bit, and it ended up basically the worm left the gear, and my mount just freely flipped over, and the camera smacked against the pier. And worse than that, when I tried to bring it back up, I heard as the teeth of the gear was just basically rubbing against it, and I was certain that I destroyed everything. I tightened up the gearbox, and it was tracking perfectly. So really, it's possible that you could damage the gear, but I wouldn't assume you've damaged the gear because your mount impacted the pier. If you dropped it off the back of a truck or out of the back of your car, then maybe you should be a little bit more worried. But they are pretty rugged. You know, they're made of metal, so they can usually handle it. Okay, in regards to the flat image presentations and using PixInsight, the flats are working out, but not sure that the flats are long enough or short enough, as the images after integration aren't even. When they start processing, he loses nebulosity as he removes the unwanted light areas. Are there tools in PixInsight which will analyze my flats or integrated images to tell me what the problem is? So if after you almost have to know what to look for in this. If after you flat calibrate it, you're still seeing dust motes, then I would think something went wrong with your flats. If you're just seeing uneven, it could very possibly be either light pollution gradient, like just basically light pollution in the sky. I mean, it could be that light pollution would be my primary, the primary thing that I would think, assuming it's not flats, assuming it's not the flat calibration. So when you start processing, you lose nebulosity. So if you're losing nebulosity as you start processing, first what I'm going to say is assuming that the gradient you're seeing is light pollution and that your flats are working, then you're going to use DBE, dynamic background extraction, to remove those gradients. And that is basically, you need to use the tool properly. You want to only click your sample spots on background sky. I think we've probably done a few different sessions on dynamic background extraction, and basically you want to select good samples and use the subtraction method if it's light pollution. You can examine the extracted background to see if the gradient matches where you think the gradient should be in the image. And if so, then you, when you actually use the subtraction method, it'll remove it. So yes, after you do apply your flats, there can still be gradients in the image, but that should be coming just from light pollution gradients. It shouldn't be an optical, it shouldn't be something that's inherent in the optical system unless your flats aren't working. So you said the flats are working, so that's why I'm kind of saying it that way.
Adam,
Yep.
the one thing to consider to make sure that in running the flats that the average exposure is about half a well full. So, I mean, if you run them too low or too high, you're going to get artifacts that are going to persist even after flat calibration.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. I'm more thinking, I was more thinking along pre-processing. But yeah, the actual acquisition, the length of the exposure is important. Making sure that your light panel or whatever light source you're using is even, because if that's uneven, that will introduce a gradient into your flats, which will introduce a gradient back into your images. So you have to make sure you're doing a lot of things right, but if you're doing a lot of those things right, then you can kind of rule out the potential issues.
Adam.
Yep.
I caught a mistake that somebody could easily make last week, and I was talking to somebody, and they were taking flats. Mistake. So we always tell everybody it's half the full well depth, right? So these 12-bit and 14, and you know, mathematically, a 12-bit camera should have well depth, right? Because it's 12 bits. Mm-hmm. Still shows that as saturation at 65,000. So half of 65,000 is still 2,500, not 2,500. Half of the, I don't know, did I explain that right, or?
Part of it, the first part of it you cut out, so I didn't hear the first part, so I'm not quite following it yet.
Okay, so we always recommend people to say well depth, and they'll take these 12-bit cameras, and at 12-bit well depth of the camera, 500 or something like that, and they'll take a 2500 ADU. The reality is, when you take a picture with that 12-bit camera you're using, is still going to stretch that out to 65,000. It's not. It doesn't give you. Saturation is not at 5,000.
Okay. Yes. Yes.
So half full well depth, as far as we're concerned, still 30,000. It's not 2,500.
Right. Right. Well, that's like
so a lot of people were making that mistake.
Yeah. In PixInsight, for example, you can display any image, right, in any bit depth, or I could say you can get the readout at 65,000, right?
Correct. Like if you look at SGP or SkyX or Maxim you're using, and even though may have, you know, 5,000 ADU well depth, mathematically, you know, on the screen shows you it renders it to 65,000.
Yeah.
So forget that what that paperwork number says. Go what it says on your software.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's see. A lot of stuff on USB cables. I'll let this be the last question. On an SCT Edge HD 8-inch, what happens if we turn the focus knob in one direction for more than 10 turns while the mirror locking knobs are tight? You know what? We've all made that mistake, or at least I made that mistake, and I didn't really notice it doing any permanent damage. I think at the time it'll give it some... basically, if you are focusing with the mirror locks while you're imaging, it might put some undue flex on the... or I shouldn't say undue flex. It might not position the mirror properly, kinda, but if you open the mirror locks and close them back up, then it just kind of releases the tension off the system and it's back to where it is. The way the mirror locks work, I think it basically just kind of clamps the things in place. So it's just putting a little bit of additional support on it. It's not truly locking it where you're going to break the mount off, or excuse me, or you're going to break the knob off or anything like that. So I wouldn't worry about it. You know, if locking the mirror down and then turning the focus knob would break something, then we would all have broken Edge HDs, because we've all done it once or twice. Morgan's going on in, about more about his LPS V4, so a light pollution filter. Okay, so you're using a light pollution filter, which probably means you're in a light polluted area, and that light pollution filter isn't going to cut out all of the light pollution. It's going to cut out most of it. So he'll focus on DBE. Found when he has the histogram halfway up, the images come out so bright. So he brought the flats down to a quarter of the histogram, and they come out better, but still have uneven light across the image. It's really hard to say. If you were to be able to post some images next session, next open session, I'm sure we'd be able to, by seeing some images and seeing what's going on, maybe the flats and the final calibrated images. We'd probably be able to identify whether it looks like an optical issue or whether it looks like light pollution. And we might even be able to tell you if your flats are properly exposed. Do I have to use an OAG with an 8-inch SCT? Not have to, but very, very highly recommended. Yeah, I would definitely suggest an off-axis guider with an SCT. SCTs, as they age, I'll say, the mirrors can loosen up just a little bit, and the off-axis guider ensures that as the mirror loosens up and moves through the sky, the guide star moves with it. So basically, you're eliminating the error as you're guiding it, as you're guiding with it. That's it. I've got 10:30. I'm going to end it for tonight. Nothing specifically scheduled for next week. If I do come up with something midweek, I will post it. We're trying not to have too many open discussions, but that said, if these focus topics work out, then we'll continue trying to focus the topics. we did have a ton of viewers tonight, which is kind of surprising. I don't know if it's so cold out there that nobody can stand to be outside imaging, or maybe the weather's just terrible everywhere. That's it. Thanks, guys, for watching. Good night, and we'll see you next week.